Hi everyone, it's Scott here. It's been a few weeks since I posted a video. I've been sort of hanging around the house a lot, still looking for work, so I'm trying to, cut back on my expenses as much as possible. I haven't really been going to movies very much at all. I did see Gone Girl recently, but I'm not really prepared to review it or anything like that this time. I think I probably need to see it a second time, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to afford to do that. I really need to be more conservative in my spending. But there was a midweek chat that was posted yesterday by James and Ian, and I sort of wanted to contribute to that. One of the questions in the midweek chat was based on something that James had brought up a few weeks ago on one of his car vlogs. James, DVD Collector 1974, does these vlogs in the cars. He's driving somewhere, he'll set up the camera and talk about whatever is interesting to him on that particular day. He had a sort of a hypothetical question a few weeks ago. He was talking about film genre, and if you met someone who wasn't familiar with a particular genre of movie, what film would you recommend as a good example of that? Ideally, I guess perhaps you meet someone who knows what movies are but hasn't actually seen one. So your job is basically to pick one example from each genre. And he had like 6 categories, but I added a few here. One of them was a Western. There are a lot of Westerns. I was thinking about this and I thought, okay, if I was going to recommend movies, I'd probably recommend more contemporary ones than necessarily classic movies, because I'm more familiar with contemporary films and they just look quite a lot different from the classic films. Not that I would discount classic films entirely. Movies from, say, the 60s, 50s, 40s, and what have you. Yeah, there's no reason not to recommend something more contemporary, especially if you're giving an example of what a movie is. Why not show them something that came out in the past 20 years as opposed to 50 or 60 years ago? Anyway, that was my thought on it. Not that I wouldn't necessarily refrain from doing that. For example, one of the categories that James didn't necessarily touch on was thriller, suspense, mystery films, as opposed to straight-out horror. Those, for me, are 2 separate categories. And the master of all those thriller films was Alfred Hitchcock, and my favorite film of his was Rear Window, so I would definitely recommend that one. For something more contemporary, you know how much I love David Fincher, so maybe Panic Room would be good. Panic Room would be a good straight-ahead sort of popcorn thriller, something without an incredibly dark ending like a lot of Fincher movies. But yeah, Rear Window would be a good classic film to show if you wanted to show something older. As far as horror movies go, that one was kind of a no-brainer. Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, and I know that other people would recommend that one right away. It's just like the ultimate horror movie, the ultimate slasher film, and probably one of the, if not the best example of the genre, then one of the best. One thing that I wanted to do is to avoid mixing genres. No horror movies that were also romantic comedies, no sci-fi movies that were also action pictures. So many of the big blockbusters that could technically be classified as science fiction because they have aliens or they have, out there technology that doesn't exist, could also easily be placed into the action category just because they've got so much action in them. So I thought, why not try and find movies that just sort of typified one particular genre instead of multiple ones. I mean, we're dealing with a hypothetical person who hasn't seen any movies before, so let's keep the categories clear-cut. Anyway, that was what I thought would be a good idea. For action movies, I selected The Bourne Identity. My first thought would be, of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but that has sort of fantasy elements in it. Then there's Die Hard, but Die Hard is more dialogue-driven than most action movies. Not that it's a bad movie, of course, it's one of the best action movies ever made. But The Bourne Identity has more action in it. A little less talking, a little more action. Jason Bourne, played by Matt Damon, is sort of the, silent, but deadly type. Sorry, I just equated Matt Damon's character to a fart. Sorry about that. And The Bourne Identity, of course, it's one of those things where you don't actually need to see, of course, an entire series. That's one thing that I didn't want to do is suggest everyone watch a whole trilogy of movies to give a good example of a genre. Just one movie in particular. And for that one, The Bourne Identity, I thought, has really good chases, lots of good fighting, and just good intrigue in general. A darn good movie. For Westerns, I picked Silverado for some reason. Silverado is an 80s movie. It's directed by Lawrence Kasdan. It stars Kevin Kline and Brian Dennehy and who else? Scott Glenn, Danny Glover, Jeff Goldblum has a small role in it. And I'm sure it's not a lot of people's idea of what a good sort of a classic Western would be. It's sort of more middle of the road, you could say. It's like an ensemble movie that's set in the Old West. And that's how I feel about a lot of Westerns and a lot of science fiction movies for that matter, is that a lot of those movies tend to occupy a particular genre, the genre of Western, simply because they're set in the Old West. That doesn't really tell you anything about the tone. Could be a drama, could be an action movie, could be a comedy for that matter. I mean, look at Million Days to Die in the West, or A Million Ways to Die in the West. Silverado is a movie that I've enjoyed for... Oh, Kevin Costner's in it too, I forgot about that. Silverado is a movie that has all the classic elements of a Western without necessarily being a classic Western. I've seen Rio Bravo, I've seen Unforgiven, a lot of the Sergio Leone Westerns, and I don't know, I just thought that a good American film with a good solid American cast of characters would probably do best. Of course, John Cleese is in the movie too, but they make a point of mentioning the fact that he's English and that he's out of place there. Anyway, that would be my choice for this hypothetical individual who's never seen a Western before. As for science fiction, I had two choices. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which has a very surreal quality to it, of course. But if it's better to have maybe sort of a straight a science fiction picture without any sort of quirkiness attached to it necessarily. How about Close Encounters of the Third Kind? That's a very classic sci-fi picture. Doesn't really straddle any other categories. It's pretty much just straight science fiction. And involves a big flying saucer and aliens. You know, you can't get more classic science fiction than aliens from another planet. The other categories James, we're talking about, of course, were comedy and drama. Now, for comedy, there's one movie that I always think of whenever I think of comedy. And that's not necessarily a parody, but one that's very sort of madcap and lighthearted and just like, you know, the kind of movie that you wouldn't take seriously for a minute, even though it does have a little bit of political commentary in there. One of my favorite movies of the 80s, Switching Channels. Switching Channels is a comedy with Burt Reynolds and Kathleen Turner as two people that work at a cable news network in Chicago, and they used to be married. They're ex-spouses. Anyway, she's just gotten back from vacation. She's brought Christopher Reeve, her new fiance, along with her, and Burt Reynolds tries all these underhanded tactics to try and drive them apart because he wants Kathleen Turner not to move away and stay with the network because she's a very important personality to have on the network, but also he just doesn't like Christopher Reeve. He thinks he's kind of douchey, and so he would rather he just go away forever. It's really funny seeing Christopher Reeve in this movie. You know, he's not known for comedy, but he's really good in it. And I like Burt Reynolds, and the whole movie itself is just very, very high energy and fast-paced. The dialogue is really rapid fire. It got terrible reviews when it came out. Probably flopped. I don't know how people feel about it nowadays, but I think people would benefit from watching it because it's a really, really fun picture. And for drama, man, there's so many great dramas that I could recommend, just so many of them, you know, across the board. Dramas are an easy way for me to be satisfied with a movie because it doesn't have to be as exciting as the most exciting action picture, or as funny as the most hilarious comedy. It just has to have an involving story with good acting and good writing. So I would like to suggest a film from the early 90s, Man in the Moon, which just happens to be the debut film of Reese Witherspoon. You all know what a big fan I am of her. But this has been one of my favorite movies for a really, really long time. It's a coming-of-age drama set in the 50s on a farm, and it's all about two sisters that fall in love with the same boy. It's just a really, really good, heartfelt drama. And quite moving, actually. And there are, of course, tons of movies that I could put in that category. I mean, there's huge amounts of dramas that would easily be suitable for that. But that one in particular I thought would be especially good. Now, for a couple other genres that weren't touched on by James, how about fantasy? Of course, there are a lot of fantasy movies that are also either musicals or action pictures. So instead, I picked The Dark Crystal, which is the Jim Henson Muppet movie. It'd be nice to have a live action movie with non-human characters for fantasy, and The Dark Crystal I think fills the bill quite nicely. For a straight-up family animated movie, how about the first Toy Story? Of course, there's all kinds of Disney hand-drawn animated movies you could see, but Toy Story is a terrific movie, groundbreaker for its time, and it's very entertaining, and it's got dialogue written by Joss Whedon. How can you go wrong? Really, really good stuff. For musicals, I would suggest Chicago, the Best Picture winner. It's a really, really great story, great songs, and kind of this, not this happy, happy, joy, joy musical that a lot of them are, but has a real dark side to it, and I appreciate that quite a bit. I also thought, how about a war picture, Saving Private Ryan? Why not? It's a big epic. It's got incredible battle scenes in it. It's got a great ensemble cast. It's very involving. It's not my favorite war picture, but it certainly is a great example of what a war movie is, and it doesn't skimp on the mayhem, that's for sure. It's classic Spielberg. Finally, I decided to add the category of biopic. I know a lot of people say biopic. I think it should be pronounced biopic, but it's basically biographical picture. Movie based on a true story, specifically about a specific person. And for that, I picked Amadeus, which is actually based on a play, but it's quite excellent. It's all about the composer, Mozart, and his conflict with Salieri. It's a terrific movie, has wonderful, beautiful music in it. Really incredible looking movie. It's a movie that I've appreciated for a very long time. And so those are my picks. If you ever come across a person who's never ever seen a movie before in their life, they've been living in the jungle all their life, and they've just come to the U.S. and they've got a home, and they've got a nice big flat screen and a Blu-ray player, and it's like, so where do I start? I think these would be good places to start right here if you want to tell them exactly, what are genre pictures? What's a good example of these particular genres? Those I think are good examples. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it, and I try to post videos more often. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.